January 1974. They'd just moved in 2 months prior. My partner and I were first on the scene. He was feeling for a light when something bumped him. That's when we found the little girl hanging from this pipe.
Jesus.
I found someone to take over who will be very good for the BSU. He wants to expand the unit, and he intends to make our approach practice.
Tell me, who's the one you want more than anything?
Manson.
I'll get you Manson.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. This is Glenn Kaiser. I'm the director of the Dolby Institute. And this podcast, if you've listened, you know it's a co-production of the Dolby Institute and the Soundworks Collection. We're doing our special coronavirus edition, focusing on episodic content and shows that have great sound design and mix coming to you at home, because that's what we're all doing right now with coronavirus and sheltering in place. We're recording today's session using the Dolby On app, and Dolby On is a free iOS and Android application which is designed to make recording and live streaming sound and video with unparalleled audio quality incredibly simple, using nothing but your device, and we're all using our iPhones. Dolby On empowers creators to make their statement with amazing sound quality anytime and anywhere. So that's my little shout out for Dolby On. We're here today to talk about Mindhunter, which is a Netflix show created and originally directed and still kind of creatively steered by David Fincher. And I'm thrilled to be talking with some of the Skywalker Sound team who do the work on Mindhunter. We're being joined today by sound effects editor Steve Bissinger. Hi, Steve.
Hello.
And re-recording mixers Steven Urata.
Hello.
And Scott Lewis.
Nice to be here. Thanks, Glenn.
I'm thrilled to have you guys here. I just binged the entire show over the past weekend, so my mind is a little scrambled right now, but I'm super excited to talk with you guys about this. And I should say at the outset that unfortunately, because of some work commitments, sound designer Ren Kleiss and supervising sound editor Jeremy Malad were not able to join us today. But this is actually good because it gives us the opportunity to talk about them. So I wanted to kind of kick off the first question for you guys. I was thinking as I was looking at this, I met David Fincher and Ren Kleiss back in '97 when we did The Game together. I was running post-production for propaganda films at the time. And so I've been a big fan of Ren's for a long time and worked with David and Ren throughout the years. And there's something about, I was thinking as I was watching Mindhunter again, even though other directors work on the show as well, it seems to so clearly have the creative fingerprint of David Fincher. And there's something that I just feel like there's something magical about the collaboration between Ren Kleiss and David. I feel like if you put me in a theater and showed me ran a piece of content that I was not familiar with, if David had directed it and Ren did the sound design, I think I would be able to know pretty quickly. So I kind of just wanted to throw the question out there. What is it that's kind of unique about the way that David and Ren approach soundtracks together that make Mindhunter sound completely unlike any other show on television?
I guess one thing is that they've worked together for so long, so they have such a nice shorthand where if David gives a note and we're not sure what it means, we'll have to go to Ren, have him translate it a little bit. I think because they've worked together for so long, they have a very signature sound when they work together.
I mean, I know I remember watching Seven, years ago, and
yeah,
it was just so dense sonically in a great way. And for me, I've now worked sort of through Ren with David on both House of Cards and this, and I've sort of learned the style. And that's one signature I would say, is that it's just, if there's a hole in dialogue, it's filled with something. Scott and Steven may take it out, but editorially, it's just packed. Anyway, so I think that's stylistically something that is kind of, when I hear their soundtracks, that's something I think of.
And definitely, like you said, it's jam-packed, where people might think, oh, it's just a show with two people sitting in a room and talking, but sonically, it's such a full landscape. They make sure to take these opportunities to fill up the air, maybe make the air heavier than to enhance the storytelling, it might not just be a very straightforward. It might seem straightforward, but the way that we'll present it will be completely full.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up, because it even, like, I think one of the things that I realized when when I was at Skywalker and I watched The Social Network come through, like, for the most part, that movie was really a handful of people sitting around conference room tables talking to each other. But somehow, David and Ren made it so complex and so acoustically interesting. And I wanted to talk with you guys about that, because I think that one of the things that is kind of a hallmark of Mindhunter in both seasons, but especially in this season, is the sonic and sound design approach to when they sit down and they interview the killers, the serial murderers. And this happens numerous times throughout the season, and we can I hope Netflix will give us some clips so that we can play some examples out. But those scenes are also really uniquely approached. So can you talk a little bit, maybe Steve, this is a question for you from the sound effects editorial, like, what was the approach to those scenes when they were interviewing the serial killers, and what was going on acoustically?
Well, he always wants to hear what's going on off screen in a huge way. And one of the notes I know he gave us is that he had gone into some of these prisons, and his biggest note was they're loud. They're really, really loud. So it's everything that you would hear, really. I mean, I'll do your normal ambiences, but and my ambiences when I'm cutting for this show in general, I'm cutting lots and lots of specifics. It's not just a bed of stuff. It's there's lots of little, things that are going on. So in those prisons, that can be, off-screen bangs, prisoners yelling like crazy. And of course that's supplemented by, loop group and other stuff. And, depending on the scene, I mean, I usually try to do sort of some creepy tones and sort of sound designy type stuff that is sometimes appropriate, sometimes not. But, again, it's filling every nook and cranny.
I'm surprised the FBI hasn't come sooner. The night I was arrested, the mayor came to see me. He came down to my cell in the middle of the night.
We fit you in as soon as we could.
So you're talking to other people?
A few. But no one who's done what you did. You held an entire city in thrall. Girls got their hair cut so you wouldn't single them out. Discos closed early. It was the largest task force New York ever assembled.
100 years from now, people will still know the name Son of Sam.
I always say, if you want to learn how to paint, go straight to the artist.
What does that mean?
You got so much publicity, there's a killer out in Kansas who idolizes you. He's writing letters to the press, and he's writing about you.
Even the production design helps, because I'm thinking about some of those interrogation scenes, and in the prisons, they're not being interrogated in these little tiny airless conference rooms for the most part. Like, one of them seems to take place in a gym, another one seems to take place in a basement boiler. Like, there's plenty of, the production design is giving lots of opportunities for interesting sound work to happen as well.
He's great at setting up. He's David Fincher. He thinks about everything. And so, because sometimes with different directors, you'll get handed a scene and it's like, well, there's nothing going on here that I can attach a sound to, With him, right. He's not only is he thinking about that, but he's thinking about how those things can attach and transition into other things. And he's amazing that way.
So Stephen and Scott, tell us a little bit about the mixing process and how you guys approach, the mix. And so who's on dialogue and music, and who's on effects?
So I'm mixing dialogue and music on the show, and Stephen's on sound effects, and we mix this up at Skywalker using picks for review. So that's kind of our process, is that David is down in LA. We'd be up at Skywalker, and then we would, do a pass and then send him like at the first. We'd still kind of work in reels, even though it's broadcast. We'd still kind of break it into chunks, digestible chunks, and work through and send him 20 minutes at a time. And he'll send notes back. We do those notes, send it back, and that's kind of our review process for this show.
What are you sending him? Are you just sending him a 2-channel stereo mix to listen to, or what's he hearing?
Yeah, he reviews the 2-track.
I should know. I don't mean to break in on your guys' thing, but also one of the reasons that we split it into 3 chunks is because it's so much to do in such a short amount of time that, I mean, compared to almost any other show I can think of, so I tried to get ahead at the beginning of the show, and that was to no avail. I mean, he was just all over us. So.
Well, how many mixing days per episode do you guys have, or does it vary?
I think for the most part, it was 3 days per episode.
3 days? That's it?
It ends up being longer because of all the extra time, but the original first pass.
He's not going to be stopped by a deadline.
Yeah, the first pass would be 3 to 4 days, but David will get whatever he wants. So whatever needs more time, we'll spend more time on that. It might be we go back into a particular scene over and over again. It kind of becomes a bit more fluid, especially working, on a streaming project where the delivery isn't necessarily a single episode at a time. We can hold the whole season back until everybody's signed off on everything. So in that sense, it helps kind of the workflow, and that things can be changing. We can conform. Picture might change. We'll go to a different episode. So the way we kind of worked through this one wasn't really like finish an episode and then move on to the next. There'd be chunks of each episode that we would kind of revisit and go back to.
And I'd be actually interested to hear what Steven has to say about this. He's probably going to say, what were you doing? But, one of the things that I try to do on my end, which I can only do to a certain degree because I don't have all the pieces and that I'm not hearing everything. I'm not hearing the ADR and all the stuff that comes in later. But I've kind of developed a method of working where I kind of pre-mix stuff. So it comes into Steven, at least as a sound effects chunk, kind of as a concept and it's not done. I mean, they have to do a lot more, obviously, but, and I don't know how, sometimes I felt like that was maybe too much. And I wasn't sure whether that was helping or not, but.
This show, without Steve Bissinger cutting effects, would have.
I was not fishing for compliments here.
I'm going to give it to you anyway. It would have been very, very difficult. He really just took an episode and handled it. Like all those off-screen storytelling moments, like in the different prisons and like the door slams and stuff. You can't just throw a door slam in. It has to be appropriate. It has to fit in that one pause to make sure that the viewer's not bored during the conversation. I mean, it's not a boring conversation. It's cut very well and performed very well, but there still are lulls in in different moments. And Steve was amazing. He just cut those moments to really fit and flow really well. All I'm doing is like moving faders up and down and adding some reverb.
I think that you're probably being a little modest there, Steven. I think that one of the things that really to me stood out from this show is there's so much effects work going on, but everything, if you don't have a trained ear and know how to listen for that stuff, like I think we all do, if you're just watching the show, like everything sits perfectly, and a lot of the stuff is happening outside at night, big open spaces. And you did a great job, I think, of mixing in with appropriate reverb and distance to make sure that everything like kind of feels like it's actually happening in that space, which is just great.
Yeah, it took a while to kind of find that balance between Scott and I, because, when we first started the season, we were really we've worked together a little bit by that point, but we were still trying to find the sense of the balance of like how much time each person gets to do certain things, if you need to do stuff alone or together. And it's kind of crazy. Like if you sat in the room at the beginning of start of our mix of an episode, it would be just like they just want to leave the room. You'd be hearing Foley, you'd be hearing backgrounds, all this stuff while Scott is trying to clean up the dialogue and mix the music. It's just crazy. But then when we're like, okay, you want to go back together and do this? And then we go back and it's like, oh, okay, great. Sounds great. And part of that is like, like you were saying, perspective. Like you have to put the appropriate amount of level and reverb to make it fit. And that's just kind of a judgment call you got to do while you're, it's crazy in the room. And then when you go back to listen to it, you're like, okay, I did place that well, or oh, I actually did that door slam a little too loud, or stuff like that. But it was a very fun experience for me.
So probably worth mentioning too how incredibly detailed Fincher's notes are that we get back.
Really?
Oh my God, it's insane. He would never stop, I don't think, unless somebody stopped him. But he was very. I would say he and Ren really also, because it's great to have fresh ears. They would. I think you guys would agree. They would come in with very detailed notes about mixed notes.
And I presume that you're talking about, so David, I think mixed, correct me if I'm wrong, but David directed the first 3 episodes of this season. Is that right?
He is the showrunner on this show. So even if he didn't direct on set, he really takes the helm for every episode, at least in post-production. So we're working directly with him via picks to make sure that we can continue that vision, but he's directing us in a very detailed manner, much more than any other director or showrunner I've ever worked with.
Which just, it's one of the reasons why the show has such an incredibly cohesive feel creatively, because, as we all know, David knows what he wants, right? And he's gonna work you guys until you get there.
But not always, right? Wouldn't you guys agree there were times he really wanted a certain thing to happen, usually with a lot of density, all these things happening at once. And it seemed like you guys would work through that. And sometimes it wouldn't be exactly what I think he originally wanted. I think it would he just had to kind of experiment a little bit. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think we would get, it might take us a minute to get to where he wanted us to go. But then if, we did something that kind of raised another idea, we would carry on with that. But it always felt to me like he knew what he was looking for. And if, we kind of went a different direction or wanted to try a different direction, he would always be really quick with exactly what he wanted. Very, very detailed of like, oh, this is close, but I want it to be like this. And then give us like detailed to the point, like down to a decibel. It'd be like down a half a dB here, up a dB here. And, sometimes it's like overly descriptive for, but it's still really helpful for how fine-tuned everything is. Yeah. That all this, every sound you hear, every mod, all the reverb is all been very carefully criticized.
And I want to dive into specific scenes because there's so much brilliant sound work in this season. But I was thinking about in episode 2, there's that unbelievable scene where Bill interviews Kevin in the pickup truck.
Yep.
And they can't turn around and look at him because he's too skittish. So, it's all played kind of forward, but the sound work in that is just so amazing.
He was almost gentle.
Gentle?
It seemed. He took a pillow from the bed and put it under my head.
That's interesting. I want to come back to that, but please continue.
He took Kathy into the other room. I couldn't tell what was going on. Then I heard noises.
What kind of noises?
Not moans, almost little cries. And then it got real quiet. I couldn't hear him anymore.
And I feel like you guys, you guys set so much ambience and tone. There's an incredibly loud train. We never see the train. We don't need to see the train. We're in a parking garage in an urban environment, so you just buy that it's there. But that scene was so beautiful from a sound perspective.
Yeah, that scene in particular, that's actually the first scene we started on when we started the season. And I think it's the last scene we worked on when we finished the
Possible, yeah.
Got a lot of it.
That was a long one.
Why was that such a challenge to nail that scene?
Getting it to be his vision exactly was one of those scenes where it's down to the half dB. And he was also very specific about the Foley in that scene. Yeah. And he really wanted to hear the kid fidgeting in the back seat.
There's no way you could have gotten the safety off and shot him with him pulling on the gun.
I guess it slipped out of my hands because he had it and he pulled the trigger. First bullet grazed my face. The second one went in the side of my head. That's when I hit the floor.
And one of his notes that Steve was talking about earlier was that he wanted to hear exactly what was in the kid's pocket, which was a quarter and 2 pennies and a knife with an empty hole with lint in it. And he wanted to hear that in his pocket while we're going through the scene. So it's like that kind of specific, the specificity of that is what made that such a difficulty.
You know, I think another thing that I found, just as maybe this is true in this scene for sure, but true throughout, he can be very technical and give very technical notes, but very often I felt like he was pushing reality, you know, like what you would see on the screen, whether it was a party with a certain number of people, he'd want it to sound like, I don't think you guys would agree with this, like twice as many people as what you saw. So he's sort of going for a feeling. I mean, I think in that scene with the Foley, you know, he wanted to hear how nervous Kevin was, right? I mean, that was the whole, with his leg bouncing in the back, which you don't really see, I don't think.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about that, because one of the things that I made note of is, and I remembered this from some of the movies that I'd worked on with Ren and David together. I think one of David's particular pet peeves is bar scenes that aren't loud enough. You know, he was like, if there's a bar scene, the music is going to be blaring.
When we empathize with the psychopaths, we actually negate the self. We deny our own beliefs about decency and humanity, and that can be very dangerous.
I can handle it.
Are you sure? Because the last place that you would want for this to happen is during an interview, especially...
Which is why I wanted to see if you had any insight.
Well, ideally, you would regulate the stress in your life. Outside of that, there's getting enough sleep, exercise, maybe meditation.
Exercise. I can do that. I can jog.
And that's a good start. But you also need to pay attention to the signs. Shortness of breath, accelerated heart rate, impaired vision, vertigo. Now, I can keep an eye out, but you are the only one that's going to feel something coming on.
Okay.
And I'm just kind of curious, Scott, for you, like, you know, the music is blaring. There's a lot of dialogue. And how are you kind of cutting through and balancing that stuff out? And obviously also trying to make sure that it's going to play over, you know, 2-channel stereo, because that's the way a lot of people are going to hear the show.
Absolutely. That was a really challenging scene as well, because he wants the music cranked, and he doesn't. You have to be very careful writing the music in there too. The futs of the music, it has to sound it has to be period specific. And so he wants a lot of brightness in that, also a lot of distortion.
Oh, that's interesting, because he wants it to sound like it's coming through a 1970s or early 80s sound system. He doesn't want it to be too hi-fi, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Finding that balance, making sure all the crowds are in there, making sure that it really feels like a dive bar, and you can still hang on to the dialogue when they're softly speaking in the corner. You know, those scenes are a challenge for sure, because a lot of times people would play that straight and just lower the music for the dialogue there. And so we had to use, you know, EQ and various futzes to make a nice pocket for the dialogue to sit in. So you still get that full bright with a bit of low end in the music and a pocket for the dialogue. So it's not muffled, because he likes the dialogue nice and bright. It gives it that nice air. And we just have to maintain that anytime they go into a space that's loud. I remember in season 1, there's a scene where Holden goes to a concert. I think it's the pilot episode, and that scene's subtitled. And I know that caused confusion.
I remember
people were like, "Why subtitle?" And it was a very specific choice to make it so loud that you can't hear, like just like it would be if you went to a concert. You know, it wasn't for, you know, because they didn't have the right quality on the microphones or anything like that. It's just because you wanted to have that feel.
You know, that scene in the bar that you mentioned, Glenn, he gave a great note on that I thought was really interesting. So in that scene, Holden is telling Wendy, or they're talking about he had, you know, a nervous breakdown at the end of season 1. And he wanted me to create these off-screen disturbances that she doesn't react to, like intentional thing. Do you remember this?
Mm-hmm.
And then the last one, when I forget what he's saying to her, but it's something where you would expect her to really be focused on him, and she looks away. And I don't know, it's just lots of little, he really thinks about the sound and how it can be used.
Yeah.
In really great ways.
Yeah, I remember a scene like that where there's nothing visually to cue this, but he just wanted off screen to hear somebody drop something and then hear people laugh.
Yeah.
And it was based off of
I think it might have been that scene, right?
I think that was in season 1. Somebody drops a fork when Holden meets Tench the first time in the cafe.
Well, actually, that tees up one of the things I want to talk to you about from a mixing and a sound design standpoint. The sound of Quantico is so interesting to me. It seems like, I don't know how many people they train at Quantico, but it seems like they're always doing target practice, gun shooting. There's always like a troop of guys running around, like, doing just this. Talk to me a little bit about the sound of Quantico and what that environment is and how you guys built that.
Well, he gave us a specific note about that. He said the thing that makes Quantico unlike any other school is that people are shooting guns outside. And then I think he also had a note about, this was maybe my favorite note of all this because it was such a great, he said, I want to hear a gun go off and there's all these birds that will fly away, but they're so stupid they keep coming back. And so every time they shoot the gun, the birds keep, I don't know if we really played that throughout the entire season because it gets a little bit too much, but
I know we established that, and then it was an ongoing thing where we would try to kind of, because he always wanted to hear gunfire, and even if it didn't necessarily serve the scene. So I know we went through a few rounds of trying some gunfire in different offices and seeing if it would work, but that was definitely something that there's always a presence of gunfire.
Talk to me about the basement. It's such a, in some ways the sound design and the mix echoes the production design. It's such a forlorn space.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really important to always hear the pipes groaning, and just the oppression of being in the basement of Quantico is really important. That it feels heavy down there. It feels like a dark, damp place. No water drips or anything like that, but just like you're in the sewer down here and you've kind of been forgotten about. And it was important to kind of maintain that and always have a groan here and there to just fill up that space whenever you can.
Yeah. And I think that was a good example too. I mean, I remember building that out. He wanted to hear pipe gurgles and all this stuff and you see the pipes on the ceiling. And I built it just knowing what I know about him. I mean, it was ridiculous. It was so dense. There was so much stuff going on. And I know that you guys thinned it out a little bit. And I think you guys said to me, dude, what the hell? Like, there's just so much stuff. And you thinned it out. And he came back with a note that said, I want to hear more pipes.
Yeah.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
So I have to, a couple things before we leave the basement. It just made me laugh so much. Like, I have never heard so many Selectric typewriters in my entire life. Like, everybody was typing in that show. That's so many people typing off screen. But I have to ask you, my favorite single sound effect in the entire show. You guys gonna guess what it is? It's the door closing in the basement.
That's hilarious. Yeah.
I feel like the door closed to their office has like 9 different individual sounds, like components to it. But how did that come about? You must have had a field day with that, Steve.
Well, that was another specific note. He wanted that door. It has a pneumatic hiss to it, and he wanted to hear a ridiculously long pneumatic hiss. It was, to me, it was like the sound effect equivalent of Norm in Cheers. Like, every time somebody comes through the door, you hear so long, and again, I don't know if, I think you guys maybe didn't quite keep up the same level of, of hearing that throughout the entire season, but.
Well, you got to make room for the dialogue.
Nah, you need the dialogue. I was curious if I have a question for Scott, actually. He didn't want to deliver stem, right? Did you get stems or was it just all stereo stems? Is that what it was? Or
there would be few cues where I would have stems. Yeah.
So how were you spreading it? What were you doing for that?
I would use a up mixer to derive some surrounds and then use reverb and repan the reverb to kind of help fill it up a bit. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, wrangling the music on that was because it's sparse music, but it's incredibly effective when it does come in. And it's almost, weave with the sound effects as somewhat of a sound design layer. It's not, it's not your classic kind of score pushing along the story necessarily.
Well, tell me a little bit. I'm glad you brought that up, Steve, because I didn't want to talk about the music. And to me, there were moments when I wasn't sure if I was hearing music or if I was hearing sound design, and I kind of loved that. But what was tell us, was it the same composer through the entire season, and what was the approach to the music?
Yeah, Jason Hill was the composer, and he was composer on season 1 as well. And the theme, Silk Drapes, is the name of one of the themes that when the show came out, I was checking out the internet to see how people were reacting to it, and I saw a lot of people trying to find that piece of score because it's so effective and so chilling. And you hear it come in when Bill goes to the basement and he's kind of investigating the boy on the cross. I think those moments, it just really makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. And it's just he did a great job with music.
Let's talk about the cars for a second, because obviously it's a period piece, a lot of period cars, and they're doing very specific things. Like Steve, you were saying, like that in that particular sequence, the car is driving really slow. Like the bridge, he drives across the bridge, he comes back. Like Did you guys have recording sessions with period cars, or how did you approach all that stuff?
I mean, there was no time for that. What was really a huge help was Ren's Zodiac library from the film Zodiac, because they had recorded a lot of cars for that. But it'll come as no surprise that David had very specific, he cared a lot about the cars, and he really wanted to hear how rumbly and, leaded those cars were back then.
Those big American V8 engines, right?
Yeah. And honestly, I probably shouldn't reveal this, but once I figured out what he liked, and there were certain specific cars that he really liked, I think I reused a lot of those cars.
You cheated.
I don't know if it's a cheat, but he liked them. They were working for him, and especially when you don't have time to go and do specific recording, you always have to poach from different vehicles and different things, especially if it's a more involved sequence.
How were the production tracks that came to you guys? And obviously I know that, Steve, you didn't cut the dialogue, but it's a period piece. A lot of it's on location. I presume that the production tracks were a challenge to work with.
Yeah, there was some challenging production. And so there's also a fair amount of more ADR in the show than you would ever know. There's a fair amount of looping, but not necessarily for quality. A lot of times it would be to change a slight nuance in a performance. Very subtle nuance. And I'd be like, oh, why are we putting ADR in here? And then I would work through it and be like, oh, I see. It's very subtle, but it is really important. So some scenes would get, looped for that reason, just because he wanted a little more reverence for something they were talking about. And very slight, no line changes or anything, just very subtle reverence. And I noticed in a few scenes that we looped.
What about in some of the big sequences? Like I'm thinking about the big sequence in the Baptist church when the mayor gets shouted down by the crowd.
That was actually incredibly well recorded. They did a great job on set with that stuff. We had good splits, really great crowd stuff. Filled it in with some loop group and ADR specifics. And that scene that's a very powerful scene. That scene really came together.
I'd love for you guys to talk a little bit about, and this is kind of the dance between sound editorial and mixing, just the way you guys shape stuff. And you said you built it so big, but that it was so dense, but there are moments when, you subtract in such a powerful way. And I made a note to myself. I love the sequence in episode 4 in Atlanta, in the space where the cops they've set up their temporary shop to investigate the Atlanta child murders. And Holden is in there, and the city commissioner comes in, and there's all this chaos and people buzzing in the background. And Holden just makes a side comment about there's no ransom. This is not a kidnapping. And everything drops out. basically goes to zero for a second just for that line, and it makes you sort of like perk up and lean into what he's about to say next. I thought it was just it was a great choice.
So there was that moment. There was actually a lot of moments where there would just be like the timing of, it seemed appropriate that there needed to be a pause, and Scott and I would have a lot of conversations about that, those moments when they came up, and we just decided to do whatever seemed appropriate. In this case, it was, we really need to lean in to listen to what they're saying, so we kind of crescendo, and then we bring it back and just hold it off. And so that all you're left with is that pause and then that space to kind of watch and listen. Other moments like that are, whenever the creepy score is coming in or something like that, sometimes in mixes you'll hear just the sound effects and BGs, the backgrounds just kind of hovering and staying in the same place. But what we like to do is really give you the space auditorially to really lean in and listen to that score and just be enveloped by that sound. So we'll pull back on those sounds really gradually, like the typewriters in the scenes or something, typing away, and then you just kind of, you're just kind of think about it. You're like, wait, where are the typewriters? You don't even think about it really. You're just listening and watching. And so there was a lot of moments like that where we kind of shaped the score and the soundscape together.
Along those lines, there's a really great moment. It's the end of the first episode, second season. Holden's outside. He's getting chewed out by his boss. And in the background is a sprinkler that builds with the scene. As he gets angrier, the sprinkler gets a little bit bigger, but it's all in the background. So unless you're tuned into it, you're not going to notice it. And it's one of those sound moments that really helps move the story along and give you a little added anxiety as you're watching.
Well, I'm glad you brought that scene up, because one of the things that I love is like that, you guys have established at the end of the previous season that Holden is prone to these panic attacks. And that particular moment when he's getting bawled out by his old boss triggers a panic attack. And so that gave you guys a lot of fun room to play with sound elements to kind of establish his state of mind, right?
Yeah, absolutely. In that moment, it was really important to make sure that we hear the conversation that's happening behind him as he's slumping down. He has to stay foreground and really feel that breathing. But the dialogue of Tench and his boss in the background is really what we're looking to hear in that moment. There's anything in Mindhunter, it's always like there is some room to play, but there's always a really specific thing that we have to make sure is coming across.
Well, I love to end up with just asking you guys, like, what was one of your favorite scenes from a sound perspective in this season of the show? Maybe something that, like, when you watch it, when it plays, just kind of makes you feel all warm and fuzzy inside.
I mean, I think the Kevin in the truck scene for me is kind of the pièce de résistance. I mean, that was, I can't remember whether the train was something I came up with or something that Fincher asked for. But yeah. I do remember one thing that was really, I wanted the train, it's an incredibly long scene, and I wanted the train to be coming from the beginning, like on and on and on. And it was really hard to do because no train, you can't find a train by that is that long. So I was like, and Steven did a lot of work on this too to make it work. And I think in the end, the mix, I'm not sure, you sort of hear it at certain times. In fact, when I watched it back, because I also just binged season 2 because I haven't had time to watch it until the last 2 days. I really noticed like there were places where the train went away very suddenly. I'm forgetting there was a line he says. I think he says something about like everything went really quiet or something and the train went. Mm-hmm. But the way I had cut it, it took a lot of work to create this train that is just coming and all these different things, brake squeals and piecing together different things. And then, just riding the scene, riding the emotion of the scene. And I know for you guys, it was a huge mixing challenge, I think.
Yeah, that scene is too traumatic for me to be my favorite. But there's the scene when in the end of the first episode that Holden runs up to the microphone at his party. And that's a scene where I really went for it with the PA treatment I just went ham, and David really loved it. And that's a scene where I was like, I'm gonna make this sound like this is a microphone that is just super hot, and Holden is blowing it here. And so that scene for me was one of those ones that like got through early on, and
nobody ever say anything about it again.
Like, oh yeah, it's cool. And I was like, oh, I worked on that so hard. I love that it went right by.
Steven, what about you?
I think there's so many great moments. I had fun on that train scene, mixing all the Steve stuff. I think one of my favorite moments is when Holden gets tricked by Tanya, I think her name is. Yeah, Tanya comes up and he gets tricked and super excited. He thinks he's going on this date. And so he gets ready, and there's a fast, quick, a bunch of cuts in a row, shaving and doing all this stuff. And he puts his suit down, and he's getting ready. And then he goes down, and then he meets her at the lobby, and then they walk really fast through this really crowded garage. And that was the whole thing. And, with David, he wanted to hear the garage really, really alive. And he wanted to hear the horns honking, the attendants, whistles blowing, and all this stuff going on. But still, the focus was with them walking, and he wanted to hear her heels, hitting the ground and echoing and everything, and getting in that really shitty car.
Sorry, I'm in a bit of a hurry. I'm supposed to fraternize with guests.
Fine. Can I catch us a cab?
Oh, no, just a little further. Here we are. It's a mess in here. I'm not usually like this.
Don't worry.
With all my running around, I can't seem to find the time. Well,
My partner and I used to be on the road. We basically lived out of our car. I've seen much worse.
Oh, that didn't. You just have to hold it, or it's fine. We aren't going very far.
Okay.
The AC doesn't work. You want to let the window down?
Sure.
And then, so that's the first cue for us with sound that, wait, something's kind of weird. Like, why are we, this is a really shitty car. The seatbelt doesn't work. She's throwing cans in the back. Is this really a date? And, and he's just going through this thing, and you kind of go through it with him. And then they start talking in the car, and then they get out. And then one of David's comments that was really great, and Steve picked out all the sounds for this, was when they get out of the car and they're slamming the doors, they're opening and slamming the doors at the diner, and it just has this really crappy, funny squeak to it. David really loved those. Great job, Steve.
Here we are.
Oh, looks closed.
Let's go. Ernie, this is Agent Ford.
Holden.
This is my cousin.
You look kinda young for FBI.
Ernie, stop it. Don't listen to him.
It happens.
They sit in the back there. Go ahead.
That's funny that you love that scene, because that parking lot scene, if I could name one scene that I disliked doing the most, it was that scene.
Well, I loved it.
Just because it was so, there was so much going on, and it wasn't like, it was, Steven worked magic on it, but it was like there was all this stuff that just had to be put in. It took forever to cut. How long does that scene last? That's that scene in the parking lot is what, 2 minutes maybe? I think I worked on that scene for 3 or 4 days.
Oh, not even 2 minutes. They just walked up to the car. That was it. That was like 15 seconds or something. Yeah, but that was...
And then you guys would call and say, hey, you missed something.
I'm surprised you guys didn't talk about the Berkowitz interview at Attica. That's...
Oh, yeah.
That was a good one.
Yeah, please.
We did something pretty cool in that scene. It's a very long... It's one of the longer interviews in the show. And we tried out something in that scene that I think works, and it's on a subliminal level in that he's being pitched down very slightly over the course of that scene until he reveals that he is lying to everyone. And in that moment, then he drops even more. And so that was a direction from David to try this, and we did, and it was very slight, very, just slightly pitching him over the scene to have him have a little more body when he reveals it, because it wasn't necessarily performed that way, but we were able to do it in post-production.
That's amazing. That's a great little sneaky thing there.
That was also a really great scene where there was a ton of off-screen stuff, and like really close, not even far away, really close by. A prisoner's, getting walked from one area to the next, and you just hear this buzzer going off, and the big clanky doors, and the chains, and walk-in, and police radios, all this stuff while they're having a conversation that you're supposed to be listening to. But somehow, we kind of bob and weaved and everything and made it work out. But it makes it so much more interesting, and you feel like you're there when all this stuff is like right there, and there's this off-screen stuff.
Without a doubt, but I feel like you guys did a great job of like establishing that chaos at the beginning of those scenes, and then when you would get into really important moments, it's not quite there to the extent that it had been before. So you carve out space for that stuff, which is fantastic.
I think one of the great, sort of what you just said, but one of the great things about that is if you do have that much stuff going on, you can then take it away and just really, it feels even more focused than it would otherwise.
Well, guys, it's great work. It's fantastic. It's I was really blown away by it, and congratulations to you guys, and obviously what a great treat for all of you to get to work on 2 seasons of this show with Ren Klyce and David Fincher, 2 of the great masters of the form. I can't wait. I hope there's a season 3. You guys, we left all the characters in such forlorn circumstances at the end of season 2. Poor Bill, his wife has left him and took all the furniture, and the house is completely empty. Like,
she left the couch.
She did leave the couch. She said she was going to do that. So yeah, I can't. I really hope there's another season that we come back and see what happens to these great characters. Guys, thank you so much for joining us and talking to us about Mindhunter today. Steven, Steve, Scott, amazing work.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Glenn.
Great. Well, that's going to wrap up this episode talking about Mindhunter. Join us next week when we talk to the folks on Ozark about the sound for that show. And this is Glenn Kaiser signing off for the Dolby Institute and Soundworks Collection. Thanks.